In the quaint village of St. Mary's Mead, a literary festival turns deadly when poet Edgar Vane is found strangled with a silk scarf, his provocative poem, The Unseen Truth, hinting at buried scandals. Miss Marple, with her keen eye and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of motives, an editor's desperation, a critic's pride, a fan's obsession, and a rival's envy. As clues, a lipstick-stained cigarette, a cryptic note, and a damning manuscript point to betrayal. Miss Marple sets a trap, revealing the critic's fear of exposure drove him to murder. In just 30 seconds, secrets unravel, and justice prevails in this classic tale of truth and deception. Chapter 1. The Festival of Verse, the village of St. Mary's Mead, with its tidy hedgerows and thatched cottages, was not accustomed to such a flurry of activity. The annual literary festival, a recent addition to the village's calendar, had transformed the sleepy green into a stage for poets and their admirers. White tents festooned with bright bunting rose like sails against the September sky, and the air hummed with the chatter of visitors from London and beyond. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her favourite armchair by the vicarage window, watched the newcomers with a quiet curiosity. Her delicate fingers paused over her knitting, her sharp eyes missing nothing as strangers milled about, clutching books and pamphlets, their voices alive with excitement over verse and rhyme. Miss Marple had little taste for modern poetry, with its jagged rhythms and cryptic meanings, but Mrs. Elspeth Dane, the festival's enthusiastic organizer, had been insistent. "You simply must come to the opening reading, Jane," she had said, her plump face glowing with pride. "We've secured Edgar Vane, the poet. Quite a coup for St. Mary's Mead." Miss Marple, ever polite, had agreed, though she suspected the event would offer more insight into human nature than into the art of poetry. That evening, the main tent glowed with the soft light of fairy lights strung along its beams. The audience, a mix of locals and literary enthusiasts, settled into rows of wooden chairs, their murmurs fading as Mrs. Dane stepped forward to introduce the star of the evening. Edgar Vane, a man in his late 30s, strode onto the makeshift stage with a presence that commanded attention. His dark hair fell carelessly over his forehead, and his eyes, intense and searching, seemed to pierce the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, carrying his words with a cadence that felt both intimate and commanding. He began with older poems, familiar to his devotees, tales of lost love and fleeting beauty that drew sighs from the audience. But it was his final piece, a new work titled The Unseen Truth, that stirred a different reaction. The poem was sharp, almost accusatory, its verses hinting at secrets buried beneath polished facades. Beneath the mask the quill reveals, the rot that festers, the shame that steals, he read, his voice cutting through the tent like a blade. Miss Marple, seated near the back in her modest grey coat, observed the crowd's response with interest. Not everyone was enraptured. Clara Hawthorne, Vane's editor, sat in the front row, her sharp features illuminated by the stage lights. A woman of precise movements, she gripped her pen tightly, scribbling notes with a fervour that seemed more anxious than inspired. Her silk scarf, a vibrant shade of emerald, slipped slightly from her shoulder as she shifted in her seat. To her left, Lionel Grimsby, a critic notorious for his venomous reviews, sat with arms crossed, his thin lips twisted into a scowl. His disapproval was palpable, and Miss Marple noted the way his fingers drummed against his sleeve. as if restraining some deeper agitation. Across the aisle, Beatrice Lyle, a young woman with wide, adoring eyes, leaned forward, hanging on Vane's every word. Her hands clutched a worn copy of his first collection, her face alight with devotion. Miss Marple, who had a knack for spotting the subtle, saw the faintest tremble in Beatrice's fingers, as if her adoration carried a weight of its own. In contrast, Sylvia Trent, a poet whose star had dimmed in Vane's shadow, lounged in her chair with a smirk that spoke of barely concealed contempt. Her dark hair was swept back, and her eyes, sharp and calculating, never left Vane as he read. When the poem ended, the tent erupted in applause, though Miss Marple sensed a discord beneath the enthusiasm. Some clapped with fervour, others with politeness, and a few, like Grimsby, offered no applause at all. Vane bowed, his smile enigmatic, and left the stage without a word. Mrs. Dane bustled forward, her voice bright as she announced the evening's reception at the village hall. As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her mind turning over the faces she had watched. There was something in the air, she thought, a tension, like the stillness before a storm. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and made her way to the reception, her steps slow but purposeful. The village hall was abuzz with laughter and clinking glasses, but Miss Marple, sipping her tea, remained an observer. She saw Clara Hawthorne in heated discussion with Vane near a corner, her gestures sharp and urgent. Grimsby stood alone, his eyes following Vane with a cold intensity. Beatrice hovered near the poet, her shyness keeping her at a distance, while Sylvia Trent held court with a group of admirers, her laughter too loud, her glances too sharp. People are so very revealing, aren't they? Miss Marple murmured to herself, her eyes twinkling with the faintest amusement. She did not yet know that by morning Edgar Vane would be dead, his voice silenced forever. But she felt, in that quiet way of hers, that the festival of verse had already begun to unravel a darker tale. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The morning after the festival's opening reading broke over St. Mary's Mead with a chill that seemed to carry an omen. The village, still draped in the festive bunting of the literary gathering, awoke to whispers that spread like wildfire through the narrow lanes. Edgar Vane, the celebrated poet whose words had captivated the crowd the previous evening, was dead. The news reached Miss Jane Marple as she sat at her breakfast table, her toast untouched, while her maid, Cherry, relayed the gossip with wide-eyed urgency. "They found him in his cottage, Miss Marple," Cherry said, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. "Strangled, they say, with a scarf. The police are there now, and Mrs. Dane is in a right state, insisting you come at once. She says you've a way with these things." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind was already at work. She set down her teacup, her delicate fingers brushing the lace tablecloth. "How very distressing," she murmured, her voice soft but her eyes sharp with interest. "I shall go directly, Cherry. Fetch my coat, please." She rose, her small figure belying the keen intellect that had unravelled many a village mystery. The cottage where Edgar Vane had been staying was a charming, ivy-clad affair on the edge of the village green, rented for the festival by Mrs. Dane herself. As Miss Marple approached, she saw the local constable, a young man named Harris, standing guard at the gate, his face pale and his posture rigid. Beyond him, the cottage door stood ajar, and the murmur of voices carried on the crisp air. Mrs. Elspeth Dane, her usual cheer replaced by a frantic energy, hurried toward Miss Marple, her hands fluttering like startled birds. "Oh, Jane, thank heaven you're here!" Mrs. Dane exclaimed, her round face flushed. "It's dreadful, simply dreadful. Poor Mr. Vane, murdered in our own village. Inspector Craddock is inside, but I told him you'd know what to make of it. You always do." Miss Marple patted Mrs. Dane's arm gently. "Calm yourself, Elspeth. We must be clear-headed. Now, tell me, who found him?" "Mrs. Price, the charwoman," Mrs. Dane replied, her voice trembling. "She came early to clean and saw him through the window, lying on the floor. She screamed fit to wake the dead. Oh dear, what an unfortunate phrase!" Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the detail. Mrs. Price, a reliable if gossipy soul, would no doubt have much to say. She stepped toward the cottage, where Inspector Craddock, a man in his early 40s with a modern approach but a healthy respect for Miss Marple's methods, awaited her. His face, usually composed, bore the strain of a case that promised to be anything but straightforward. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Craddock said, tipping his hat. "I'm glad you're here. This is a nasty business, and the festival has drawn all sorts of people. We could use your insight." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes already scanning the scene. "Tell me what you've found." "Inspector," she said, stepping into the cottage's small parlour. The room was a study in contrasts, cosy and cluttered, yet marked by the stark reality of death. Edgar Vane lay sprawled on the rug, his face a ghastly shade, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Around his neck, knotted with cruel precision, was a silk scarf, its deep green hue stark against his pallor. Miss Marple noted its quality. Fine, expensive, not unlike the one Clara Hawthorne had worn the previous evening. The poet's hands were outstretched, as if he had reached for something in his final moments, and a few pages of a manuscript lay scattered near his body, their edges curled and stained with ink. Craddock gestured to the scene. No signs of a struggle, oddly enough. No broken furniture, no marks on the door or windows. Whoever did this was let in, or had a key. The scarf's the murder weapon, no question. We're checking for fingerprints, but it's clean so far. Miss Marple bent slightly, her eyes tracing the room's details. A low table held a single glass of red wine, untouched, its surface unmarred by smudges. Beside it, an ashtray contained a cigarette butt, its tip marked with a faint trace of lipstick in a soft coral shade. She straightened, her mind turning over the implications. "Curious," she said softly. "A cigarette, but no smell of smoke in the room. And the wine? Untouched?" Mr. Vane was expecting someone, perhaps, but not for long. Craddock raised an eyebrow. "You think he knew his killer?" "Almost certainly," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild but certain. "People do not strangle one another without some intimacy, Inspector. A stranger would have used a less personal method, don't you think?" She moved to the manuscript, careful not to disturb it. The pages, titled The Unseen Truth, were handwritten, the ink bold and hurried. The words were sharp, almost vicious, hinting at betrayals and hidden sins. One line caught her eye. "The voice that speaks shall choke on truth." She frowned, her thoughts drifting to the faces she had observed at the reading. "This poem," she said, "seems to have been very dangerous indeed." Craddock followed her gaze. "You think it's connected? The killer wanted to stop it?" "Or to stop what it revealed," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "We must know more about Mr. Vane's acquaintances. Who was close to him at the festival?" Craddock consulted his notebook. "We've identified 4 main suspects so far. based on their ties to Vane and their presence last night. Clara Hawthorne, his editor, who worked with him for years. Lionel Grimsby, a critic who loathed him. Beatrice Lyle, a young woman who followed him like a devotee. And Sylvia Trent, a rival poet with no love lost between them. Miss Marple nodded, her memory conjuring their faces from the tent. Clara's anxious scribbling, Grimsby's scowl, Beatrice's adoration, Sylvia's smirk, each held a piece of the puzzle. "We shall need to speak with them," she said, "but first let us examine this room a little further." She moved to the window, its latch secure, the glass unmarred. The cottage's back door, leading to a small garden, was similarly undisturbed. Yet something caught her eye. A faint scuff mark on the floor near the hearth, as if a shoe had dragged in haste. She pointed it out to Craddock, who made a note to have it examined. "It may be nothing," she said, "but people are careless when they are frightened." The fireplace itself was cold, its ashes undisturbed, but a small pile of papers lay nearby, unburned. Miss Marple sifted through them carefully, finding receipts, a festival programme, and a crumpled note in a hurried scrawl. "Meet me at 10. We must talk." No signature, no addressee, but the ink matched the manuscripts. She handed it to Craddock, her expression unreadable. "This may be significant," she said, or it may be a distraction. People often leave clues without meaning to." Craddock pocketed the note. "We'll check the handwriting, but why leave the manuscript? If it's so dangerous, why not take it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Perhaps the killer didn't have time, or perhaps they didn't understand its full meaning. Mr. Vane's words seemed to have stirred many passions. They stepped outside, where Mrs. Dane waited, wringing her hands. "Oh, Jane, what do you make of it?" she asked. "Who could do such a thing?" "It is too early to say," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but firm. "But people reveal themselves, Elspeth, in their actions and their silences. We shall see." Craddock arranged for the suspects to be questioned at the vicarage, where Miss Marple could observe without drawing attention. As they walked back to the village, she reflected on the scene. The scarf, the cigarette, the untouched wine, the scattered manuscript, each was a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to weave. Strangulation, she knew, was a crime of emotion, of closeness gone wrong. Whoever had killed Edgar Vane had stood near him, looked into his eyes, and acted with deliberate intent. The thought did not shock her. She had seen too much of human nature for that. But it intrigued her, as all such puzzles did. At the vicarage, she settled into the parlour, where a fire crackled cheerfully despite the grim occasion. Craddock joined her, his notebook ready. "We'll start with Clara Hawthorne," he said. "She's waiting outside. Shall I bring her in?" Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Yes, Inspector, and let us listen carefully. People often say more than they mean to, especially when they are afraid of being found out." As Craddock left to fetch the editor, Miss Marple's mind returned to the cottage, to the silk scarf and the lipstick-stained cigarette. She thought of the festival tent, of the faces lit by fairy lights, each hiding something: jealousy, fear, devotion, or rage. The poet's words had struck a nerve, and someone had silenced him to keep those secrets buried. But secrets, Miss Marple knew, had a way of rising to the surface, like bubbles in a still pond. She would watch and listen and piece together the truth, as she always did. Chapter 3. The Editor's Tale. The vicarage parlour, with its chintz curtains and polished mahogany, offered a deceptive calm as Miss Jane Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting needles clicking with a rhythm that belied the gravity of the occasion. The fire cast a warm glow, but the air held a chill, as if the shadow of Edgar Vane's death had followed them from the cottage. Inspector Craddock stood by the door, his notebook open, his expression a blend of determination and deference to the elderly woman whose insights he had come to value. Outside, the festival continued in a subdued hum, its gaiety marred by whispers of murder. Clara Hawthorne, the first to be questioned, entered with the poise of a woman accustomed to command. In her early 40s, she had the sharp features of a hawk, softened only by the careful application of makeup and the elegance of her attire. Her navy dress was tailored to perfection, and a new silk scarf, blue, not green, draped loosely about her neck. Miss Marple noted its similarity to the murder weapon, though she made no comment, merely offering a gentle smile as Clara took the seat opposite. "Thank you for coming, Miss Hawthorne," Craddock began, his tone formal but not unkind. "We're trying to piece together Mr. Vane's last hours. As his editor, you knew him well, I presume?" Clara's lips tightened briefly before she answered. "As well as one can know a man like Edgar. He was brilliant, but challenging. His work demanded much, and he was not one for compromise." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes resting on Clara's hands, which gripped the arms of the chair. "He was a poet of some intensity, I gather," she said softly. "His reading last night stirred strong feelings. That poem, The Unseen Truth, it seemed to unsettle many." Clara's gaze flickered, but she met Miss Marple's eyes steadily. "It was provocative, yes. Edgar had a gift for cutting too close to the bone. I warned him it might cause trouble, but he was stubborn. He insisted on reading it unaltered." "Trouble?" Craddock pressed, his pencil poised. "What kind of trouble?" Clara hesitated, her fingers smoothing the scarf as if it were a talisman. "The poem hinted at scandals, personal, professional. Edgar didn't name names, but the implications were clear enough to those who knew him. I told him it could ruin reputations, perhaps even his own. He laughed it off, said the truth was worth the cost." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild curiosity. "And whose reputations might have been at risk, Miss Hawthorne? Yours, perhaps?" Clara's eyes widened, a flush creeping up her neck. "Mine? Certainly not. I was his editor, not his confidant. My job was to polish his words, not to live in them." Her voice was firm, but her hands betrayed her, twisting the scarf's edge until it creased. Craddock glanced at Miss Marple, who gave the faintest nod. He continued, "You were seen speaking with Vane after the reading, at the reception. It looked heated. Care to explain?" Clara's composure wavered, but she recovered quickly. "We discussed the poem, yes. I urged him to reconsider publishing it as it was. He was dismissive, said I worried too much about propriety. That was all." She paused, then added, "I left the reception early, around 9. I was tired and went back to my lodgings at the Blue Boar." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "Alone, Miss Hawthorne?" she asked, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. Clara stiffened. "Yes, alone. I had no reason to linger. The festival was exhausting, and I had manuscripts to review." Craddock made a note, then held up a photograph of the green silk scarf found around Vane's neck. "This was used to kill him. It's similar to the one you wore last night. Care to explain?" Clara's breath caught, but she recovered with a laugh that sounded forced. That scarf! It was a gift from Edgar himself, months ago. He was generous with such gestures. I wore it to the reading as a nod to him, but I left it at the village hall during the reception. Anyone could have taken it. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. How very careless, she murmured. Silk scarves are such personal things, don't you think? Almost like a signature. Clara's smile was tight. I suppose so, but I assure you, I had no reason to harm Edgar. His success was mine in a way. Without him, my publishing house loses its brightest star. Craddock nodded, though his expression remained sceptical. One last thing. The note found in the cottage. Meet me at 10. We must talk. Any idea who wrote it? Clara shook her head, her eyes narrowing. None. Edgar had many admirers and many enemies. It could have been anyone. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze soft but piercing. Enemies, Miss Hawthorne? That's a strong word. Did Mr. Vane speak of anyone in particular? Clara hesitated, then shrugged. He mentioned Lionel Grimsby once or twice. The critic despised him, and Edgar enjoyed baiting him. But that's all I know. Craddock dismissed her with a promise to follow up, and Clara left the parlour, her steps quick and purposeful. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the editor's words. Clara's composure was admirable, but the tremor in her hands, the quick deflection of questions about the scarf, suggested more than professional concern. People, Miss Marple knew, often hid their fears behind polished exteriors, and Clara Hawthorne was no exception. "What do you make of her, Miss Marple?" Craddock asked, closing his notebook. "She is clever," Miss Marple replied, her voice thoughtful. "And frightened, though she hides it well. The scarf is interesting, Inspector. A gift from Vane, she says, yet lost so conveniently. And her insistence that his success was hers. There's a dependency there, don't you think? But whether it drove her to murder, or merely to worry, we cannot yet say." Craddock nodded, his respect for her insight evident. "I'll check her alibi at the Blue Boar, and the scarf. We'll see if anyone saw it at the reception. Who's next?" "Lionel Grimsby, I think," Miss Marple said, picking up her knitting. "Critics are such fascinating people, Inspector. They thrive on judgment, but they dislike being judged themselves. Let us see what Mr. Grimsby reveals." As Craddock left to summon the critic, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Clara. The editor's story was plausible, but there was a brittleness to it, like a teacup with a hidden crack. The scarf, the heated exchange, the poem's dangerous truths, all pointed to secrets Clara was not ready to share. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a counterpoint to the questions swirling in her mind. The truth, she knew, lay not in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. And she would listen carefully for the silences that betrayed the guilty. Chapter 4. The Critic's Disdain. The vicarage parlour, with its faint scent of lavender and the soft crackle of the fire, seemed an unlikely stage for unravelling a murder. Yet Miss Jane Marple sat as if it were the most natural place in the world. Her knitting needles moved with a quiet precision, a steady rhythm that contrasted with the undercurrent of tension in the room. Inspector Craddock stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the pale light filtering through the lace curtains. The festival outside continued in a muted fashion, its attendees whispering of the tragedy that had cast a pall over St. Mary's Mead. Lionel Grimsby entered the parlour with the air of a man who considered himself above such proceedings. He was tall and gaunt, his face etched with lines that spoke of years spent sharpening his pen against the egos of others. His grey suit was immaculate, but his eyes, cold and unyielding, betrayed a temperament that thrived on conflict. He took the offered chair with a grudging nod, his thin lips curling into a sneer as he glanced at Miss Marple, clearly underestimating the elderly woman with her wool and needles. "Mr. Grimsby," Craddock began, his tone clipped but polite, "we're investigating the murder of Edgar Vane. As a critic who reviewed his work, you had strong opinions about him. Care to share them?" Grimsby's sneer widened. Vane was a charlatan dressed in poet's clothing. His work was overwrought, all flourish and no substance. I said as much in my reviews, and I stand by it. The man had no depth, only a knack for charming. Fools. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes lifting to meet Grimsby's. "Strong words, Mr. Grimsby," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle curiosity that belied its sharpness. "You were at his reading last night. I noticed you seemed displeased. Was it the poem, The Unseen Truth, that troubled you?" Grimsby's jaw tightened, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he masked it with disdain. "That drivel!" It was an insult to poetry, a veiled attack on anyone with taste. Vane thought himself clever, hinting at scandals to stir up his audience. It was pathetic, really. Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. "You're saying the poem was an attack? On whom exactly?" Grimsby shrugged, his fingers drumming on the arm of the chair. "Who knows?" Vane was vague enough to make everyone squirm. He probably meant me, among others. He resented my reviews, thought I was too harsh. But truth hurts, Inspector, and I deal in truth. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild interest. Truth is a curious thing, Mr. Grimsby. It can cut both ways, don't you think? Did Mr. Vane ever suggest he knew something about you? Something personal, perhaps? Grimsby's eyes narrowed, and for a moment his composure faltered. He knew nothing worth knowing, he snapped. Vane was all bluster. If he had dirt, he'd have used it long before now. Craddock made a note, his gaze steady. Where were you after the reading, Mr. Grimsby? Say, between 9 and 11 last night. Grimsby's fingers stopped drumming. At the reception for a while. I spoke to a few colleagues, had a drink, then went to my room at the Blue Boar. I was in no mood for Vane's posturing or the festival's nonsense. Alone? Craddock pressed. Yes, alone, Grimsby said, his voice sharp. I don't need company to enjoy my own thoughts. Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking. You didn't visit Mr. Vane's cottage then? She asked, her tone as innocent as a child's. It's not far from the Blue Boar, and you might have wanted to discuss his poem. It seemed to upset you so. Grimsby's face darkened, his sneer giving way to a scowl. I had no reason to see him. I said all I needed in my reviews. Why would I waste my time on a man I despised? Despise is a strong word, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling faintly. It suggests passion, Mr. Grimsby. And passion can lead people to act in ways they might not expect. Grimsby leaned back, his expression cold once more. I'm a critic, Miss Marple, not a murderer. I tear down with words, not with my hands. Craddock held up the photograph of the green silk scarf. This was used to kill Vane. Familiar to you? Grimsby barely glanced at it. It's a scarf. I don't pay attention to women's accessories. If you're implying I took it, you're barking up the wrong tree. Miss Marple noted the dismissal, but her mind lingered on Grimsby's reaction to the poem. His anger was palpable, yet calculated, as if he feared what Vane's words might expose. She recalled his scowl at the reading, the way his fingers had clenched as Vane spoke of hidden shame. Critics, she knew, were often as vulnerable as those they judged, their authority built on a fragile foundation of reputation. Craddock flipped a page in his notebook. One more thing. A note was found in Vane's cottage. Meet me at 10. We must talk. Any idea who might have written it? Grimsby's lips curled slightly. None. Vane had a knack for making enemies. It could have been any of them. His editor, that lovesick girl, or that has-been poet, Sylvia Trent. They all had reasons to hate him. Miss Marple's needles paused again. Hate is a powerful motive, Mr. Grimsby, she said, but so is fear. People will do much to protect what they value most. Grimsby met her gaze, his eyes like flint. I value my integrity, Miss Marple. Vane couldn't touch that, no matter what he wrote. Craddock dismissed him with a nod, and Grimsby left the parlour, his strides long and deliberate. The door closed behind him, and Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. He's a cold one. What do you think? Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Grimsby is a man who lives by his reputation, Inspector. A critic's power lies in being feared, but that makes him vulnerable too. If Vane's poem threatened to expose some flaw, perhaps a professional indiscretion, it might have pushed him to act. His denial was too quick, don't you think, as if he'd prepared it? Craddock nodded, jotting down her words. I'll have Harris check his movements last night. If he was at the Blue Boar, someone might have seen him. And that poem sounds like it's the key to this mess. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. Words can be weapons, Inspector, and Mr. Vane wielded them with precision. We must learn what truth he uncovered that someone wished to silence. As Craddock prepared to summon the next suspect, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Grimsby's demeanour. His disdain was a shield, but beneath it she sensed a flicker of fear. The poem had struck a nerve, and his reaction suggested he knew more than he admitted. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary's Mead years ago, when a local solicitor's sharp tongue had masked his own secrets until they unravelled under scrutiny. People, she thought, were so very predictable when their pride was at stake. "Who's next?" Craddock asked, breaking her reverie. "Miss Beatrice Lyle, I think," Miss Marple replied, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Devotion can be as dangerous as disdain, Inspector. Let us see what this young woman reveals about her poet." Chapter 5. The Devoted Fan. The vicarage parlour, with its familiar comforts of polished wood and soft cushions, seemed to Miss Jane Marple a perfect vantage point for observing the intricacies of human nature. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room, and her knitting needles moved with their usual quiet precision, a counterpoint to the weight of the investigation unfolding. Inspector Craddock stood near the door, his notebook worn from use, his expression one of cautious anticipation. The murder of Edgar Vane had stirred St. Mary's Mead, and each new interview brought them closer to the truth, or further into the web of secrets spun by those closest to the poet. Beatrice Lyle entered the parlour hesitantly, her slight frame almost lost in the oversized cardigan she wore. She was young, no more than 22, with pale skin and eyes that held a mix of awe and nervousness. Her brown hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she clutched a dog-eared copy of Vane's first poetry collection, Whispers of the Soul, as if it were a lifeline. Miss Marple noted the way her fingers trembled, not with cold, but with the intensity of emotion that often accompanied youth. "Miss Lyle," Craddock began, his tone gentle to put her at ease, "thank you for coming. You were a great admirer of Mr. Vane, I understand. Can you tell us about your interactions with him at the festival?" Beatrice's eyes widened, and she nodded, her voice soft but fervent. "He was extraordinary. His poetry spoke to me, you know, like he understood things I've never said aloud. I went to the reading last night to hear him, and it was magical. The unseen truth. It was so powerful, so brave." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze resting kindly on the young woman. "You were quite moved by it, I saw," she said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "You were in the audience, near the front. Did you speak to Mr. Vane afterward?" Beatrice's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her book, her fingers tracing its worn cover. "Yes, at the reception. I just wanted to thank him. I told him how much his work meant to me. He was kind, but he seemed distracted, like he was waiting for someone. I didn't stay long." Craddock made a note, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What time was this, Miss Lyle? And where did you go after?" Beatrice hesitated, her fingers tightening on the book. "It was about 8:30, I think. I left the village hall soon after. I walked around the green for a bit, just thinking about his words. Then I went back to my room at Mrs. Carter's guest house." "Alone?" Craddock asked, his tone still gentle but probing. "Yes," Beatrice said quickly, then bit her lip. "I mean, I was alone when I left. I didn't see anyone else." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet curiosity. "You were near Mr. Vane's cottage, weren't you, Miss Lyle? It's not far from the green. Did you perhaps hope to catch another glimpse of him?" Beatrice's flush deepened, and her eyes darted to the floor. I did walk past his cottage, yes. I thought maybe he'd be outside, or I'd see him through the window. But I didn't go in, I swear. I just stood there for a moment, then went to my room." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, their soft clicks filling the brief silence. "Did you smoke a cigarette while you were there, my dear?" she asked, her voice as mild as ever. Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. "A cigarette? No, I don't smoke. I mean, I've tried it once or twice, but not last night." Her voice faltered, and she clutched the book tighter, as if it could shield her. Craddock held up a photograph of the cigarette butt found in Vane's cottage. Its coral lipstick stain faint but unmistakable. "This was found at the scene, Miss Lyle. The shade looks similar to the one you're wearing. Care to explain?" Beatrice's hand flew to her lips, and she shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know anything about that. I didn't go inside. I told you. I left him alone. He was alive when I walked away." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp, noting the girl's panic. "No one is accusing you, my dear," she said gently, "but people sometimes see things they don't realize are important. Did you notice anyone else near the cottage? Anyone at all?" Beatrice's gaze flickered, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of speaking. Then she shook her head again, more firmly. It was dark, and I was thinking about the poem. I didn't see anyone." Craddock exchanged a glance with Miss Marple, who gave a slight nod. He pressed on. "The note found in the cottage. Meet me at 10. We must talk." "Any idea who might have written it?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head once more. "I don't know. Mr. Vane had so many people who loved him, but some hated him too. His poetry made people feel things, strong things. Maybe someone didn't like what he said. Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her gaze steady. "Love and hate are close companions, Miss Lyle," she said. "They can lead people to do extraordinary things, even things they regret. You admired Mr. Vane deeply. Did he ever share anything with you? Perhaps something about his poem? Or someone it concerned?" Beatrice's tears spilled over, and she wiped them away with a trembling hand. "He didn't tell me anything specific, just he said the poem was his truth, and he had to speak it, no matter what. He looked sad when he said it, like he knew it would cause trouble." Craddock closed his notebook, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Miss Lyle. We may need to speak with you again. If you remember anything, even a small detail, come to us." Beatrice nodded, clutching her book as she rose, her steps unsteady as she left the parlour. The door closed softly behind her, and Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "She's hiding something, isn't she?" Miss Marple's needles clicked once more, her expression serene but her mind racing. "Oh yes, Inspector. Poor child, she's frightened, and not just of us. She lied about the cigarette, though I don't think she's our killer. Her devotion to Vane was real, but devotion can blind one to the faults of others, or to their own actions." Craddock nodded, jotting down a note. "I'll have the cigarette butt tested for prints, though I doubt we'll find any. And her alibi, walking the green alone, doesn't hold much water. Anyone could have seen her near the cottage." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "But what interests me most is what she didn't say. She saw something, or someone, near that cottage, I'm sure of it. Fear kept her silent, but fear has a way of loosening tongues in time." Craddock rubbed his chin. "You think she's protecting someone?" "Or protecting herself," Miss Marple replied. "Young girls like Beatrice often see more than they understand. In my village there was a girl much like her, in love with a painter who came to no good. She kept his secrets out of loyalty until the truth could no longer be hidden. We must be patient with Miss Lyle." Craddock smiled faintly. "Patience isn't my strong suit, but I trust your instincts. Who's next?" "Sylvia Trent," Miss Marple said, her needles pausing once more. "A rival's envy can be as fierce as a fan's devotion, Inspector. Let us see what Miss Trent has to say about her fellow poet." As Craddock left to summon the next suspect, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Beatrice. The girl's tears, her trembling hands, her quick denial of the cigarette, all pointed to a truth she was not ready to share. The lipstick stain was a small clue, but a telling one, and Miss Marple knew that small clues often led to great revelations. She thought of Vane's poem, its sharp words cutting through the facades of those around him. Beatrice had loved him, but love, Miss Marple knew, could be as dangerous as hate when it came to murder. Chapter 6. The Rival's Ambition. The vicarage parlour, bathed in the soft light of a late September afternoon, retained its air of quiet dignity, despite the grim purpose that had gathered its occupants. Miss Jane Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles weaving a delicate pattern as her sharp eyes missed nothing. The faint hum of the literary festival drifted through the window, now subdued by the shadow of Edgar Vane's murder. Inspector Craddock, standing near the mantel, adjusted his tie, his face set with the determination of a man navigating a maze of half-truths. The interviews thus far had revealed much about the poet's world. Ambition, devotion, disdain, but the truth remained elusive. like a shadow moving just out of sight. Sylvia Trent entered the parlour with a confidence that bordered on defiance. She was a striking woman in her mid-30s, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp with a restless energy. Her dress, a deep burgundy, was chosen to command attention, and her posture suggested a woman accustomed to holding her own in a world that favoured men like Vane. She sat without being asked, crossing her legs with a casual grace that did not quite mask the tension in her jaw. "Miss Trent," Craddock began, his tone measured. "You were a rival of Edgar Vane's, I understand. Can you tell us about your relationship with him and your movements last night?" Sylvia's lips curved into a smile that held little warmth. "Rival? That's generous, Inspector. Edgar Vane was a thief of the spotlight, a man who built his name on charm rather than craft. My work was overshadowed by his, but I didn't need to kill him to prove my worth." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze gentle but piercing. "You seemed unimpressed at his reading last night, Miss Trent," she said softly. "I noticed you smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. His poem, The Unseen Truth, appeared to amuse you. Did it strike a particular chord?" Sylvia's smile tightened, and she leaned back, her fingers tapping lightly on the arm of the chair. Amused? Perhaps. Edgar loved to play the provocateur, tossing out cryptic verses to make people squirm. That poem was a jab at everyone. Critics, editors, even me, I suppose. But it was all posturing. He didn't have the courage to name names. Craddock raised an eyebrow, his pencil poised. "You sound certain. Did Vane ever discuss the poem with you? Or hint at what it meant?" Sylvia laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the room. "Discuss? Edgar didn't confide in me. We weren't friends, Inspector. We argued, yes, at the festival bar, after the reading. He had the nerve to call my latest collection derivative. I told him his work was all style, no soul. It was a public spat, nothing more." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet curiosity. "Public, you say? And yet arguments can linger, Miss Trent. Did you see him again after the bar? Perhaps at his cottage to continue your discussion?" Sylvia's eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. "Number I left the bar around 9, had a drink with some festival-goers, and went to my room at the Red Lion. I had no reason to chase after Edgar. He wasn't worth my time." Craddock made a note, his gaze steady. "You were seen at the bar until 9, but no one confirms your whereabouts after that. The cottage isn't far from the Red Lion. Sure you didn't take a walk?" Sylvia's fingers stilled, and for a moment her composure wavered. "I told you, I went to my room, alone. I don't need an audience to sleep, Inspector." Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking. "And the scarf used to kill Mr. Vane," she said, her tone as mild as ever. "A green silk one, quite distinctive. You don't favour silk, Miss Trent?" Sylvia's smile returned, this time with a hint of mockery. "Silk? Too ostentatious for my taste. I prefer cotton, practical, unpretentious. If you're suggesting I took that scarf, you're mistaken. I don't even own one like it." Craddock held up the photograph of the scarf, watching her closely. "It belonged to Clara Hawthorne, or so she claims. Any idea how it ended up around Vane's neck?" Sylvia shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Clara's careless with her things. Anyone could have picked it up at the reception. Or perhaps she had her own reasons to silence Edgar. She was his editor, after all. too close for comfort, if you ask me. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Jealousy is a curious thing, Miss Trent, she said. It can creep into the heart unbidden, especially when one feels overshadowed. You and Mr. Vane were rivals, as you say. Did his success ever rankle? Sylvia's laugh was brittle. Rankle? Of course it did. He stole opportunities that should have been mine. But I'm not so petty as to kill for it. My work will outlast his, Inspector. I don't need blood on my hands to prove it. Craddock flipped a page in his notebook. One last question. The note found in Vane's cottage. Meet me at 10. We must talk. Any idea who might have written it? Sylvia's eyes narrowed, but she shook her head. Number Edgar had a way of stirring trouble. It could have been anyone. Clara, desperate to control him. Grimsby, smarting from his reviews. Or that girl, Beatrice, mooning over him like a lovesick puppy. Ask them. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze steady. Ambition is a powerful force, Miss Trent, she said. It can drive one to great heights or to dark deeds. Mr. Vane's poems seem to threaten someone's ambitions, perhaps even yours. Sylvia stood, her movements sharp and deliberate. My ambitions are my own, Miss Marple. Edgar's death doesn't change that. If you'll excuse me, I have a reading to prepare for. Craddock nodded, dismissing her, and Sylvia left the parlour, her heels clicking on the polished floor. The door closed, and Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. She's got a temper, that one, and no love for Vane. Do you think she's hiding something? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her expression thoughtful. Oh yes, Inspector. Miss Trent is a woman of pride, and pride is a fragile thing. Her rivalry with Vane was more than professional, it was personal. That argument at the bar, her dismissal of the scarf, her vague alibi, all suggest she's guarding something. But whether it's guilt or merely resentment, we cannot yet say. Craddock nodded, jotting down her words. I'll have Harris check her movements at the Red Lion. If she left her room, someone might have noticed. And that poem, every suspect mentions it. It's like a fuse waiting to be lit. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. Mr. Vane's words were a mirror, reflecting truths people wished to hide. We must look closer at that manuscript, Inspector. It holds the key to this murder. As Craddock prepared to summon the next witness, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Sylvia Trent. Her confidence was a shield, but beneath it lay a bitterness that could easily turn to rage. Miss Marple recalled a woman in St. Mary's Mead, a talented seamstress whose envy of a rival had led to petty sabotage. Nothing so grave as murder. But the seed was the same. Ambition, when thwarted, could be a dangerous spark, and Sylvia Trent burned with it. Who's next, Miss Marple? Craddock asked, breaking her reverie. Let us review the manuscript itself, Miss Marple replied, her needles pausing. I should like to read the unseen truth more closely. Words, Inspector, can be as revealing as actions, and Mr. Vane's were chosen with care. Chapter 7. The Manuscript Secrets. The vicarage parlour, with its familiar air of quiet order, seemed to Miss Jane Marple a sanctuary amidst the turmoil of the literary festival. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, casting a soft warmth over the room, but the weight of Edgar Vane's murder hung heavy in the air. Her knitting lay idle in her lap for once, as she focused on the task at hand. Inspector Craddock sat across from her, the scattered pages of the unseen truth spread out on the small table between them, their edges curling slightly, stained with the poet's ink and the chaos of his final moments. Outside, the festival continued in a hushed murmur, its attendees unaware of the intricate puzzle being pieced together within these walls. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her delicate fingers tracing the lines of Vane's handwriting. "Words, Inspector," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of certainty, "are never chosen lightly by a poet. Mr. Vane's poem was meant to provoke, and it did, fatally so." Craddock nodded, his brow furrowed as he leaned over the manuscript. "It's cryptic, I'll give you that." All this talk of masks and hidden shame, it's like he was daring someone to act. But who? And why leave it behind? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained grave. Perhaps the killer didn't understand its full meaning, or perhaps they were interrupted. Let us see what truths Mr. Vane was so eager to unveil. She began to read, her voice steady and clear, as if reciting a hymn. The poem was dense, its imagery sharp and unforgiving. It spoke of a quill that cuts the veil of lies, of greed cloaked in praise, and of a heart that betrays its own song. One passage stood out, its words almost a taunt. "The voice that speaks shall choke on truth, its venom spent, its power undone." Miss Marple paused, her finger resting on the line. "This is no mere metaphor, Inspector. This is a challenge, aimed at someone specific." Craddock rubbed his chin, his eyes scanning the pages. It's like he was pointing a finger at the whole literary world, editors, critics, rivals. But it's too vague to pin down one person. Could it be all of them? Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Oh no, Inspector. Poets like Mr. Vane are precise, even in their ambiguity. This poem was meant for someone who would recognize themselves in it. We must consider what each suspect stood to lose if its truths were made public." Craddock gathered the pages, careful not to smudge the ink. "We've got Clara Hawthorne, who relied on Vane's success for her publishing house. Lionel Grimsby, whose career could be ruined by a scandal. Beatrice Lyle, who loved him but might have feared his rejection. And Sylvia Trent, whose rivalry was personal as well as professional. Any one of them could have felt threatened." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the suspects' interviews. Clara's scarf, Grimsby's anger, Beatrice's lie about the cigarette, Sylvia's bitterness, each tells a story, but the poem is the thread that binds them. Let us examine the physical evidence again. The scarf, for instance. Have you learned more about it? Craddock consulted his notes. It's Clara's, no doubt. She admitted it was a gift from Vane, but claims it was lost at the reception. No fingerprints on it, though, which is odd. The killer was careful, or wore gloves. The wine glass is clean too, except for Vane's prints. The cigarette butt is our best lead. It's being tested, but the lipstick suggests a woman, possibly Beatrice. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Or someone who wished it to seem so. Lipstick is easily acquired, Inspector. In my village, there was a young man who used such a trick to mislead a rival, though it was only a matter of stolen apples, not murder. We must not assume too much. Craddock raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You see traps everywhere, Miss Marple. Only because people set them, she replied, her tone mild but her eyes sharp. The note, meet me at 10, we must talk. Has it been analysed? Not yet, Craddock admitted. The handwriting doesn't match Vane's, but it's too generic to pin down without samples from the suspects. I've asked Harris to collect some discreetly. Miss Marple's gaze returned to the manuscript. This poem was read aloud last night, before an audience. If its target was among them, they would have felt its sting. We should request the guest list from Mrs. Dane. Someone in that tent knew what Vane was hinting at, and they acted to silence him. Craddock made a note, his expression thoughtful. Good idea. I'll have it by tonight. Anything else in the poem that stands out? Miss Marple turned to another page, her finger pausing on a line. The coin of fame buys no peace. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. This suggests greed, perhaps, ambition. It could point to Clara, whose publishing house depended on Vane's fame, or Sylvia, whose career suffered in his shadow. But it might also hint at Grimsby. Critics, too, trade in fame, though theirs is a colder kind. Craddock leaned back, his frustration evident. It's like chasing shadows. The poem accuses everyone and no one. How do we narrow it down? Miss Marple's needles, now back in her hands, resumed their rhythm. By watching, Inspector. People betray themselves in small ways. A glance, a hesitation, a word too carefully chosen. The killer believed this poem was a threat, but they left it behind, perhaps in haste. That tells us something about their state of mind. Craddock nodded, gathering the pages. I'll have these photographed and returned to evidence. Anything else you want to look at? Miss Marple considered, her mind drifting to the cottage. The scuff mark near the hearth, she said. It was slight, but deliberate, as if someone moved quickly. And the wineglass, untouched. Mr. Vane was expecting a visitor, but the meeting turned deadly before he could drink. We should ask Mrs. Dane about the cottage's visitors that evening. She's a busybody, but a useful one. Craddock smiled, accustomed to her knack for finding clues in the mundane. I'll speak to her, and I'll check the suspects' alibis again. Someone's lying about their movements. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Oh yes, Inspector. Lies are like weeds. They grow quickly, but they always leave roots to be found. We shall need to dig a little deeper. As Craddock left to make his inquiries, Miss Marple returned to the poem, her mind sifting through its words. She thought of a case in St. Mary's Mead, years ago, when a vicar's sermon had stirred gossip that led to a theft. Words, she knew, could be as dangerous as deeds, and Vane's had struck a nerve. The manuscript was not just evidence, it was a map to the killer's fears. She would read it again, and watch, and listen, for the truth was there, hidden in the lines, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 8. A Village Gossip's Clue. The late afternoon light filtered through the vicarage parlour's lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the polished floor. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual armchair, her knitting temporarily set aside as she sipped a cup of tea, its steam curling like a question mark in the air. The fire crackled softly, a comforting contrast to the chill of Edgar Vane's murder that lingered over St. Mary's Mead. Inspector Craddock had stepped out to coordinate with Constable Harris, leaving Miss Marple to reflect on the threads of the case thus far. The provocative poem, the silk scarf, the lipstick-stained cigarette, and the elusive note. Each clue pointed to a truth buried beneath layers of pretense. And Miss Marple knew that truth often surfaced in the most unexpected places. Mrs. Elspeth Dane had arranged for Miss Marple to meet with Mrs. Price, the village charwoman who had discovered Vane's body. Mrs. Price was a woman of robust opinions and an even more robust tongue, known for her ability to gather and dispense gossip with the efficiency of a telegraph. Miss Marple had long relied on such sources, for village gossip, when sifted carefully, often held grains of truth overlooked by official inquiries. Mrs. Price bustled into the parlour, her apron slightly askew, her round face flushed with the importance of her role in the drama. She carried a tray of scones and jam, a gesture of hospitality that Miss Marple accepted with a gracious smile, knowing it would put the woman at ease. "Oh, Miss Marple," Mrs. Price began, setting the tray down with a clatter. "It's a terrible thing, isn't it? Poor Mr. Vane, strangled in his own cottage. I nearly fainted when I saw him through the window, lying there so still. And that scarf, green as emeralds it was, knotted tight as you please." Miss Marple poured tea for them both, her movements deliberate. "It must have been a dreadful shock, Mrs. Price," she said, her voice soothing. "You were there early, I understand. Tell me, what did you see before you found him?" Mrs. Price settled into a chair, her eyes bright with the thrill of being questioned. "Well, I went to the cottage at 7, as Mrs. Dane asked me to tidy up for Mr. Vane. He was a particular man, liked things just so. I got there, and the curtains were drawn, which wasn't usual. I peeked through the gap, and there he was on the floor, with that scarf around his neck. I screamed and ran to fetch Constable Harris." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle encouragement. "And before that, Mrs. Price, the evening before, perhaps, when you were about the village, did you notice anything near the cottage? People coming or going?" Mrs. Price's eyes narrowed, her mind sifting through her vast store of observations. "Well, now you mention it, I did see something. Last night, after the reading, I was tidying up the village hall. Mrs. Dane always leaves a mess, bless her. It was past 10, and I took the shortcut past Mr. Vane's cottage to get home. I saw a man lurking about, near the garden gate. Tall, thin, with a coat pulled up high. Looked furtive, he did, like he didn't want to be seen." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "A man, you say? Could you tell who it was?" Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I couldn't swear to it, Miss Marple, but he looked an awful lot like that critic, Mr. Grimsby. Same lanky build, same way of moving, all sharp and quick. I thought it odd, him being there so late, especially after how he glowered at Mr. Vane during the reading." Miss Marple's fingers brushed the edge of her teacup, her mind filing away the detail. "Very interesting, Mrs. Price. And did you see anyone else? Miss Hawthorne, perhaps? Or Miss Lyle? Or Miss Trent?" Mrs. Price shook her head, her lips pursed. "Not near the cottage, no. But I saw Miss Hawthorne earlier, at the reception, fussing with her scarf. That green one, just like the one used to. Well, you know, she was in a right state, arguing with Mr. Vane about something. And Miss Trent, she was at the bar, laughing too loud, like she was trying to prove she didn't care. That young Miss Lyle, though, she was hovering near Mr. Vane all evening, looking like a lost lamb." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression thoughtful. "And Miss Hawthorne's scarf? Did you see it after her argument with Mr. Vane?" Mrs. Price frowned, thinking hard. "Now you mention it, I didn't. She was wearing it when she arrived at the hall, but later, when I was clearing glasses, I noticed she had a different one, blue, I think. I thought maybe she'd changed it to look smart, but now? Well, it's queer, isn't it?" "Very queer," Miss Marple said softly, her mind turning over the implications. "And tell me, Mrs. Price, did you hear any talk about Mr. Vane's poem, The Unseen Truth? It seems to have caused quite a stir." Mrs. Price's eyes lit up, eager to share. "Oh, yes, everyone was talking about it. They said it was full of secrets, hints at things people didn't want known. I heard Mr. Grimsby muttering to someone that Vane was playing with fire. And Miss Hawthorne, she looked proper worried when she left the reading. Miss Trent just laughed it off. But it was a mean kind of laugh, if you know what I mean." Miss Marple nodded, her memory conjuring the faces in the tent. Grimsby's scowl, Clara's anxious scribbling, Sylvia's smirk, Beatrice's adoration. "People often say more than they intend, Mrs. Price," she said. "You've been most helpful." Mrs. Price beamed, pleased to be of use. "Anything for you, Miss Marple. If I hear more, I'll come straight to you." As Mrs. Price bustled out, Craddock returned, his notebook in hand. "Any luck?" he asked, settling into a chair. Miss Marple recounted Mrs. Price's observations, her voice calm but precise. "Mr. Grimsby near the cottage, past 10, looking furtive. Miss Hawthorne's scarf, missing after her argument with Vane. These are not mere coincidences, Inspector. They point to a sequence of events we must unravel." Craddock's eyes narrowed. Grimsby lied about his movements then. He said he was at the Blue Boar all evening. And Clara's scarf, either she's telling the truth about losing it, or she's covering something up. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Or someone else is using it to mislead us. The scarf is a bold clue, Inspector. Almost too bold. In my village, there was a case where a stolen handkerchief was left at a scene to point suspicion elsewhere. We must be cautious." Craddock made a note, his expression thoughtful. "I'll confront Grimsby about his whereabouts. And I'll have Harris ask around the reception. Someone might have seen who took that scarf. Anything else?" Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the window, where the festival tents stood like silent sentinels. Mrs. Price mentioned Clara's financial troubles. It seems her publishing house depends heavily on Vane's success. That gives her a motive to protect him, or to fear what his poem might expose. We should look into her affairs discreetly. Craddock nodded, rising. "I'll get on it. Who's next?" Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Let us pause for now, Inspector. I should like to think over what Mrs. Price has told us. Gossip is like a quilt, full of patches that seem haphazard, but when stitched together they form a pattern. We are close to seeing it, I think." As Craddock left to pursue his inquiries, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the suspects. Grimsby's furtive presence at the cottage contradicted his story, suggesting guilt or fear. Clara's missing scarf and financial dependence hinted at desperation. Beatrice's lie about the cigarette and Sylvia's bitter rivalry added layers to the puzzle. The poem, with its veiled accusations, was the key, and Miss Marple knew that the truth lay in understanding who it threatened most. She sipped her tea, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands, ready to unravel the next thread in the tapestry of murder. Chapter 9. The Critic's Confession. The vicarage parlour, with its familiar air of quiet respectability, seemed to Miss Jane Marple a haven where the tangled threads of human motives could be gently unpicked. The late afternoon had deepened into evening, and the soft glow of a single lamp illuminated the room, casting long shadows across the chintz and mahogany. Her knitting lay untouched in her lap, for her mind was wholly occupied with the puzzle of Edgar Vane's murder. The fire burned low, its embers a faint echo of the passion that had driven someone to silence the poet forever. Inspector Craddock stood by the mantel, his face etched with the strain of a case that grew more complex with each revelation. Mrs. Price's gossip had provided a crucial clue. Lionel Grimsby, seen near Vane's cottage late at night, contradicting his claim of retiring early to the Blue Boar. It was time to confront the critic. Grimsby entered the parlour with the same air of disdain he had worn before, his gaunt frame seeming to fill the room with an unspoken challenge. His grey suit was as impeccable as ever, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, like a man who sensed the net tightening. He took the offered chair, his posture rigid, his thin lips pressed into a line that suggested he would rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Grimsby," Craddock began, his tone sharp but controlled, "we've had a new piece of information. You were seen near Mr. Vane's cottage last night, after 10 o'clock, despite telling us you were at the Blue Boar. Care to explain?" Grimsby's fingers tightened on the arm of the chair, but his sneer remained intact. "Seen? By whom? Some village busybody with nothing better to do than spy on honest men?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained serene. "The village has sharp eyes, Mr. Grimsby," she said softly, "and they see more than you might think. It would be best to tell us the truth. Why were you at the cottage?" Grimsby's sneer faltered, and for a moment his gaze darted to the floor. Then he leaned back, his voice cold but unsteady. "Very well. I went to see Vane. I wanted to know what that blasted poem was really about. He'd been hinting for weeks that he had something on me, something that could ruin my reputation. I couldn't let that stand." Craddock's pencil hovered over his notebook. "So you admit you were there? What happened when you saw him?" Grimsby's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "We argued, as we always did. He was smug, sitting there with his wine and his manuscript, taunting me with that poem. He said it would end me, that the literary world would see me for what I was. I demanded to see it, but he refused. I left him alive, Inspector, I swear it. I was angry, but I didn't touch him." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "Angry enough to take a scarf, perhaps? One left carelessly at the reception, belonging to Miss Hawthorne." Grimsby's face darkened, his voice rising. "A scarf? I told you. I don't bother with such things. I didn't see any scarf, and I certainly didn't take one. If you're trying to pin this on me, you're wasting your time." Craddock held up the photograph of the green silk scarf, watching Grimsby closely. "This was used to kill Vane. You were in his cottage, by your own admission, after 10. That puts you at the scene around the time of the murder. What did Vane say that made you so angry?" Grimsby's fingers drummed a rapid beat, his composure fraying. "He accused me of taking bribes," he spat. "Said he had proof I'd written favourable reviews for publishers who paid me off. It was a lie, of course, but if that poem went public, it could have ruined me. People believe what they want to believe, and Vane knew how to twist the knife." Miss Marple's needles, now back in her hands, began their soft clicking. "A critic's reputation is a fragile thing, Mr. Grimsby," she said. "To be accused of corruption would be devastating, wouldn't it?" "Enough to make one act rashly, perhaps." Grimsby's eyes flashed, but he leaned forward, his voice low and fierce. "I didn't kill him. I left him sitting there, gloating over his wretched poem. I went back to the Blue Boar and stayed in my room. Check with the innkeeper if you don't believe me." Craddock made a note, his expression unreadable. "We will. And the note found in the cottage. Meet me at 10. We must talk." "Did you write it?" Grimsby shook his head, his sneer returning. "Number I didn't need to arrange meetings with Vane. I went on impulse, after stewing over his performance. Someone else wrote that note. Probably that editor of his, or the girl who followed him like a shadow." Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was sharp. "You seem quick to point to others, Mr. Grimsby. Yet you were there, at the cottage, when you said you weren't. Lies, even small ones, can unravel a man's story." Grimsby stood, his movements abrupt. "I've told you what happened. I didn't kill him. You want a murderer. Look at Clara Hawthorne. She had everything to lose if Vane's poem tanked her business. Or Sylvia Trent, eaten up with jealousy. I'm done here." Craddock nodded, dismissing him, but his eyes followed Grimsby as he strode out, the door closing with a sharp click. Turning to Miss Marple, he said, "He's shaken, that's clear." "Admitting he was there changes everything. Do you think he's our man?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Grimsby is a man of pride, Inspector, and pride can be a dangerous master. His confession explains his presence, but not the scarf or the cigarette. He's telling part of the truth, I think, but not all of it. A man so quick to deflect suspicion often has something to hide." Craddock rubbed his chin, his notebook open. "I'll have Harris check his alibi at the Blue Boar. If he was seen returning after 10, it tightens the timeline. And those bribes Vane mentioned could be worth digging into." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over Grimsby's words. "Indeed. If Vane had proof, it might be among his papers. We should look for letters, perhaps, or notes he kept. And the scarf, its absence from Grimsby's story is telling. Someone took it deliberately to use or to mislead." Craddock made a note, his frustration tempered by respect. "You're right about the scarf. It's too convenient, showing up around Vane's neck, almost like it was meant to point to Clara." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Or to distract us from the real killer. In my village, there was a case where a stolen glove was left to implicate an innocent man. We must be wary of clues that seem too neat, Inspector." Craddock smiled, accustomed to her wisdom. "Who's next, then?" "Let us speak to Miss Lyle again," Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their rhythm. "She was near the cottage, and her lie about the cigarette suggests she saw something or someone. A gentle nudge might loosen her tongue." As Craddock left to summon Beatrice, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Grimsby. His confession was a crack in his armour, but it did not tell the whole story. The poem's accusation of bribery was a motive, but the scarf and the cigarette pointed elsewhere. She recalled a saint, Mary's mead grocer, who had lied about his whereabouts to hide a lesser sin, only to be caught when the truth unravelled. Grimsby's pride, she suspected, was both his strength and his weakness, and it would lead her to the truth, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 10. The Fan's Deception. The vicarage parlour, with its soft lamplight and the faint scent of lavender, seemed to Miss Jane Marple a place where secrets could be gently coaxed into the open. The evening had deepened, and the festival outside had quieted to a murmur, its attendees retreating to their lodgings under the weight of Edgar Vane's murder. The fire in the grate cast a warm glow, but the air held a tension that matched the tightening threads of the investigation. Miss Marple's knitting lay in her lap, her needles still for now, as her sharp mind sifted through the clues, the green silk scarf, the lipstick-stained cigarette, the provocative poem, and now Lionel Grimsby's reluctant admission of his late-night visit to Vane's cottage. Each piece was a fragment of a larger truth, and Miss Marple knew that patience would reveal the pattern. Inspector Craddock stood by the door, his notebook worn from constant use, his expression a mix of determination and curiosity. Beatrice Lyle's earlier interview had left them with questions. Her lie about the cigarette, her nervous demeanour, and her presence near the cottage suggested she knew more than she had shared. Craddock had summoned her again, hoping a second conversation might loosen her tongue. Beatrice entered the parlour, her steps hesitant, her eyes wide with apprehension. She clutched the same dog-eared copy of Vane's poetry collection, her fingers white-knuckled around its edges. Her pale face was drawn, and the coral lipstick she wore seemed a stark contrast to her trembling lips. She sat, her gaze darting between Craddock and Miss Marple, as if expecting judgment. "Miss Lyle," Craddock began, his tone gentle but firm, "we need to clarify a few things from our last talk. You were near Mr. Vane's cottage last night, and you denied smoking a cigarette. Yet we found one with lipstick matching yours. Can you tell us the truth this time?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to lie. I was scared. I did smoke a cigarette outside the cottage. I was nervous, standing there, hoping to see him again. But I didn't go inside, I swear." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her expression one of kind concern. "No one is accusing you of more than you've done, my dear," she said softly. "But you must tell us everything. You were near the cottage, smoking. What else did you see, or whom?" Beatrice's hands trembled, and she clutched the book tighter, as if it could anchor her. I saw someone go into the cottage after I left. It was dark and I couldn't see clearly, but there was a figure, tall and thin, moving quickly. I thought it was a man, but I didn't stay to look. I was afraid of being caught lingering there." Craddock's pencil paused, his eyes narrowing. "A tall, thin figure? Around what time was this, Miss Lyle?" Beatrice bit her lip, thinking hard. "It was just after 10, I think. I'd been walking the green for a while, then stopped by the cottage. I smoked the cigarette, then left when I saw the figure. I went straight back to Mrs. Carter's guest house." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her voice remained gentle. "And you didn't recognize this person? Not even a guess, my dear. You were so close to Mr. Vane, so devoted. You must have noticed the people around him." Beatrice's tears spilled over, and she wiped them away with a shaking hand. "I didn't know who it was. It could have been anyone. Mr. Grimsby, maybe, or someone else from the festival. I just wanted to see Edgar, Mr. Vane, one more time. His poem, it was so beautiful, but it scared me. He looked at me during the reading, like he was saying something just to me." Craddock exchanged a glance with Miss Marple, then held up the photograph of the green silk scarf. "This was used to kill Mr. Vane. You were at the reception earlier. Did you see Miss Hawthorne's scarf, or anyone handling it?" Beatrice shook her head, her voice trembling. "I saw Miss Hawthorne wearing it, but I didn't notice it after she argued with Mr. Vane. I was too busy watching him. I didn't see anyone take it." Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was sharp. "You spoke to Mr. Vane at the reception, you said. Did he invite you to the cottage later, perhaps? Or mention who he was expecting?" Beatrice's flush deepened, and she looked down at her book. He did invite me, yes. He said I could come by later, around 9:30, to talk about his work. I went, but I didn't go inside. I just stood outside, smoking, feeling foolish. He was alive when I left, I know he was." Craddock made a note, his expression thoughtful. "And the note? Meet me at 10. We must talk. Did you write it?" "No." Beatrice's voice was sharp with panic. "I didn't write any note. I just wanted to see him, to tell him how much his poetry meant to me. I didn't want to hurt him." Miss Marple's needles, now back in her hands, began their soft clicking. "Love can be a heavy burden, Miss Lyle," she said gently. "It can make us see things through a veil, or hide things we fear to face. You're certain you saw no one else clearly, not even a glimpse of this figure's face?" Beatrice shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry. I was so caught up in my own thoughts. I didn't want to get involved, to make trouble. I loved him." Craddock closed his notebook, his tone softening. "Thank you, Miss Lyle. We'll need to verify your story, but you're free to go for now. If you remember anything else, come to us." Beatrice nodded, rising unsteadily, her book clutched to her chest as she left the parlour. The door closed softly, behind her, and Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "She's a mess, but I don't think she's the killer. That figure she saw sounds like Grimsby, doesn't it?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her expression thoughtful. "It does, Inspector, but we must be careful. A tall, thin figure could describe others, or it could be a deliberate misdirection. Beatrice's lie about the cigarette was fear, not guilt, I think. She saw something that frightened her, and it's keeping her silent." Craddock nodded, jotting down a note. "I'll have Harris check her story at the guest house. If she was back by 10:30, it narrows the timeline. And that figure, if it was Grimsby, his confession didn't mention seeing Beatrice, which is odd." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "People omit what they wish to conceal, Inspector. Beatrice's devotion makes her vulnerable, but also observant. She may yet recall something crucial. In my village, there was a young girl who saw a theft but kept silent out of loyalty to a friend. It took time, but the truth came out." Craddock smiled, accustomed to her anecdotes. "What's our next move?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze drifting to the fire. "We must test the suspects, Inspector. The poem is the heart of this crime. Its words provoked the killer. I suggest we arrange for the unseen truth to be read again at the festival's closing event. Watch their faces, their reactions. The guilty one will not be able to hide their fear." Craddock raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A trap, then? Risky, but it could work. I'll arrange it with Mrs. Dane. Anyone else we should talk to first?" Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Not yet, Inspector. Let us see how they react when the poem's words are spoken again. Truth has a way of unsettling those who wish it buried." As Craddock left to make arrangements, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Beatrice. The girl's tears, her trembling hands, her glimpse of a shadowy figure, all pointed to a truth she was too afraid to fully reveal. The poem, the scarf, the cigarette, and now a mysterious figure at the cottage. The pieces were falling into place, but the pattern was not yet clear. Miss Marple knew that patience and a careful ear would bring the murderer into the light. Chapter 11. The Trap is Set. The evening of the literary festival's closing event descended upon St. Mary's Mead with a restless energy. The village green aglow with fairy lights that did little to dispel the shadow of Edgar Vane's murder. The main tent, its canvas walls fluttering in the cool September breeze, was filled with a subdued crowd, their murmurs tinged with curiosity and unease. Miss Jane Marple sat near the back, her modest grey coat blending into the audience, her sharp eyes scanning the faces around her. Her knitting was tucked away in her bag. For tonight, her focus was entirely on the trap she had proposed to Inspector Craddock. The poet's final work, The Unseen Truth, would be read aloud once more, its provocative words a lure to unsettle the guilty. Craddock stood discreetly near the tent's entrance, his notebook tucked away, his gaze alert. He had arranged with Mrs. Elspeth Dane to include the reading as a tribute to Vane, a decision that had sparked both interest and apprehension among the festival-goers. The suspects, Clara Hawthorne, Lionel Grimsby, Beatrice Lyle, and Sylvia Trent, were all present, seated in different parts of the tent, their expressions a study in contrast. Miss Marple noted their positions. Clara near the front, her posture rigid, Grimsby in the middle, his arms crossed, Beatrice near the aisle, clutching her poetry book, and Sylvia at the side, her eyes darting with a restless intensity. Mrs. Dane took the stage, her usual exuberance tempered by the occasion. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying a forced brightness. "Tonight, we honour Edgar Vane by sharing his final work, The Unseen Truth. It is a fitting tribute to his genius, and we are fortunate to have his words preserved." As she stepped aside, a young poet, chosen for his neutral status, began to read. His voice, clear and resonant, filled the tent with Vane's sharp, accusing lines. "The quill that cuts the veil of lies shall pierce the heart that hides its guise." Miss Marple watched the suspects closely, her eyes missing nothing. Clara's hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white against her blue scarf. Grimsby's scowl deepened, his fingers drumming a rapid beat on his knee. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, her book pressed to her chest as if to shield her heart. Sylvia's lips curled into a faint bitter smile, but her gaze was fixed on the reader, unblinking. The poem continued, its verses weaving a tapestry of betrayal and hidden shame. The coin of fame buys no peace, its glitter blinds, its way to lease. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the side as if seeking an escape. Grimsby's drumming ceased, his face paling as the words struck home. Beatrice let out a soft sob, quickly stifled, while Sylvia's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold calculation. When the line, "The voice that speaks shall choke on truth," rang out, Grimsby stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Stop this!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the tent like a blade. "It's lies, all of it! Vane was a fraud, and this is nothing but slander." The crowd gasped, and Craddock moved closer, his hand resting lightly on his notebook. Grimsby's eyes were wild, his composure shattered, but he caught himself, sitting down heavily as the reader paused, uncertain. Miss Marple's gaze remained steady, her mind noting every detail. Grimsby's outburst was revealing, but not conclusive. His fear was palpable, yet it could stem from pride rather than guilt. She glanced at the others. Clara's face was ashen, her hands trembling. Beatrice seemed frozen, her tears silent. Sylvia's expression was unreadable, her eyes now fixed on Grimsby with a curious intensity. The reading concluded, and the audience applauded, though the sound was hesitant, tinged with unease. Mrs. Dane returned to the stage, her smile strained as she announced the evening's end. As the crowd dispersed, Craddock approached Miss Marple, his voice low. Grimsby's reaction was something, wasn't it? Looked like he was ready to bolt. Miss Marple nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Indeed, Inspector. His outburst was telling, but not necessarily damning. A man protecting his reputation might react so, whether guilty or not. Did you notice the others?" Craddock glanced at his notes. Clara looked like she'd seen a ghost. Beatrice was crying, but that's her way. Sylvia, hard to read, but she was watching Grimsby like a hawk. "Precisely," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but certain. "The poem struck them all, but in different ways. Clara fears exposure. Beatrice mourns. Sylvia calculates. Grimsby's anger suggests he feels the most threatened, but we must not leap to conclusions." Craddock rubbed his chin, his eyes scanning the emptying tent. "We've got Grimsby at the cottage, thanks to Mrs. Price and Beatrice's story. His confession about arguing with Vane fits the timeline. But the scarf and the cigarette, those don't add up yet." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Clues can mislead, Inspector, when they're placed to do so. The scarf points to Clara, the cigarette to Beatrice, yet neither feels quite right. In my village, there was a case where a stolen brooch was left to implicate a maid, but the real thief was someone else entirely. We must look beyond the obvious." Craddock nodded, his respect for her insight unwavering. "I'll have Harris check Grimsby's room at the Blue Boar for anything suspicious, maybe a trace of that scarf or something tying him to the cottage. And I'll press Beatrice again about that figure she saw. She's holding back." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Patience, Inspector. Beatrice is frightened, but fear can loosen tongues. As for Grimsby, his outburst tonight shows he's vulnerable. If he's guilty, he'll make another mistake." Craddock made a note, then paused. "What about Sylvia? She was too calm, almost like she was enjoying the chaos." "Miss Trent is a woman of ambition," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "Her calm is a mask, I think, but it hides something, resentment perhaps or knowledge. We must watch her closely." As they left the tent, the night air cool against their faces, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the poem's words. They had stirred the suspects, each reacting in a way that revealed their fears. Grimsby's outburst was the loudest, but Clara's silence, Beatrice's tears, and Sylvia's calculation were equally telling. The trap had been set, and the guilty party had felt its pressure. Now Miss Marple knew it was only a matter of time before the truth slipped free, like a stitch dropped from a carefully woven fabric. Craddock glanced at her, his expression curious. "What's our next step, Miss Marple?" She adjusted her coat, her gaze distant but sharp. "We wait, Inspector, and we watch. The poem has done its work tonight. Tomorrow we shall see who unravels first." Chapter 12. The Truth Unveiled. The vicarage parlour, bathed in the soft light of a new morning, seemed to Miss Jane Marple a fitting place to draw the threads of Edgar Vane's murder to a close. The fire crackled gently, its warmth a quiet counterpoint to the tension that had gripped St. Mary's Mead since the poet's death. Her knitting lay folded in her basket, for her hands were still, her mind wholly occupied with the puzzle that had unfolded over the past days. Inspector Craddock sat across from her, his notebook filled with the details of their investigation. The green silk scarf, the lipstick-stained cigarette, the cryptic note, and the provocative verses of the unseen truth. The reading at the festival's closing event had shaken the suspects, and now, with new evidence in hand, the truth was within reach. Craddock leaned forward, his face a mix of anticipation and weariness. "We've got something solid, Miss Marple," he said, holding up a report. "The wine glass from Vane's cottage. It had Vane's prints, as expected, but also a partial print from Grimsby. It was overlooked in the initial sweep, but the lab confirmed it this morning, and Harris found a witness, a barmaid at the Blue Boar, who saw Grimsby leave the inn after 10 and return past 11, looking agitated." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained grave. "Most interesting, Inspector. And the scarf? Any further word on that?" Craddock nodded. "Clara Hawthorne's story checks out. She was seen at the reception without it after her argument with Vane. A festival volunteer found it on a chair later, but no one saw who took it. The cigarette butt, though, no prints, and the lipstick could belong to Beatrice or someone mimicking her. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind sifting through the clues. A partial print, a late-night return, and an outburst at the reading. Mr. Grimsby has been careless, hasn't he? But let us consider the whole picture, Inspector. The poem, I believe, is the key. She reached for the manuscript, its pages now carefully preserved, and read aloud a line that had lingered in her mind. The voice that speaks shall choke on truth. Setting it down, she looked at Craddock, her voice soft but certain. This poem was a weapon, aimed at someone whose secrets could not bear exposure. Mr. Grimsby's reaction last night, his fear, his anger, suggests he was its target. Shall we have him in? Craddock agreed, and moments later, Lionel Grimsby was ushered into the parlour. His gaunt frame seemed diminished, his usual sneer replaced by a wary tension. He sat, his eyes darting between Miss Marple and Craddock, as if sensing the trap closing. "Mr. Grimsby," Craddock began, his tone firm, "we have evidence placing you at Vane's cottage the night he died. Your fingerprints were found on the wine glass, and you were seen returning to the Blue Boar after 11, agitated. You lied about your movements. Care to explain?" Grimsby's face paled, his hands gripping the chair. "I told you I was there," he said, his voice strained. "We argued, yes, about his poem. It accused me of taking bribes, a lie that would have ruined me. I touched the glass. He offered me a drink, but I didn't take it. I left him alive." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze gentle but unrelenting. "And yet, Mr. Grimsby, you were so quick to deny being there at first, and when the poem was read last night, you could not contain your fear. Why was that, I wonder? Was it because the unseen truth held a truth about you that could not be silenced?" Grimsby's eyes widened, his composure crumbling. "It was slander. Vane had no proof, just rumours he dressed up in verse. I didn't kill him. I wouldn't stoop to that." Craddock leaned forward, his voice steady. "The scarf used to kill him belonged to Clara Hawthorne, but it was taken from the reception. You were there, Grimsby. Did you take it, perhaps to throw suspicion elsewhere?" Grimsby's hands shook, his voice rising. "I didn't touch any scarf. I argued with Vane, yes, but I left him sitting there, smug as ever. Someone else must have come after me." Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost a murmur. "Someone else, you say? Yet Beatrice Lyle saw a tall, thin figure enter the cottage after her. Around 10. You fit that description, Mr. Grimsby. And your fingerprints on the glass place you there at the critical moment. You feared Vane's poem would expose your bribery, didn't you? A critic's power lies in his reputation, and you could not let it be tarnished." Grimsby's face contorted, his voice a hoarse whisper. I couldn't, but his resistance broke, and he slumped in the chair, his head in his hands. "All right, I went back. After our argument, I was furious. I saw the scarf at the reception, and I took it, thought it might scare him, make him retract the poem. But it went wrong. He laughed at me, said he'd publish it no matter what. I grabbed the scarf, and before I knew it, he was gone." Craddock's eyes narrowed, and he stood, signalling to Constable Harris outside. "Lionel Grimsby, you're under arrest for the murder of Edgar Vane." As Harris led Grimsby away, Miss Marple turned to Craddock, her expression serene but tinged with sadness. "It was the poem, Inspector. It exposed his shame, and he acted to silence it. The scarf was a convenient tool, taken to cast suspicion on Clara, but his fear betrayed him. In my village, there was a man who destroyed a letter to hide his debts, but the truth always finds a way out. Craddock shook his head, a wry smile on his lips. You've done it again, Miss Marple. That reading last night, it flushed him out. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. People are predictable, Inspector, when you understand their fears. Mr. Grimsby's pride was his undoing, as it so often is. As the festival closed and the tents were dismantled, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her mind already turning to quieter pursuits. The truth had been unveiled, not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of observation and patience. St. Mary's Mead would settle back into its routine, but Miss Marple knew that human nature, with all its passions and secrets, would always provide another puzzle to unravel.